Hello, huddlers, and welcome to our second career huddle. This one features Jacob Warwick, and we'll explore his interviewing and negotiating expertise, which I have to say is kind of awesome. I've had a chance to speak with Jacob several times now in the last couple of months, and have no doubt his recommendations will kind of be a game changer for those of you in the hunt for a new role today or in the near future. So, hello, Jacob. First of all, how are you and where are you?
So I am in upper northwest Montana, and I have a 3-month-old infant who has slept perfectly since he was 2 weeks old, except for last night. So, Drew, I know we were kind of jesting about that a couple of days ago, and I'm bragging. He's always perfect. Last night, I woke up 3 or 4 times. So, of course, the only time I have an important event is the time.
Yeah, you jinxed it basically.
I definitely jinxed it.
Yeah.
The potty schedule was off. The throwing up. All the good things that parents get to look forward to. But man, it's a blessing.
And northwest of Montana makes you the first guest that has actually been live from Montana. So that's exciting. I mean, northwest, I feel like you're practically in Canada.
Yeah, actually, it's a stone's throw to Canada, about 40 miles from the border. And
There you go.
Yeah, sun goes down at midnight in June, so we get that. But about 25 years of my career in San Francisco and in tech, Silicon Valley kind of ecosystem, and then in and out of New York and LA. So don't let the cattle farming fool you.
Right. Okay. So let's get right into this on interview. And before we get to negotiation, and we talked about this in our prep call, that a lot of interviews start with this question, which you and I called a trap, which is the tell me about yourself. How can we avoid what's the best way to handle a question like that?
Yeah, the tell me about yourself is not always asked exactly like that, but generally speaking, always everyone's going to want to know a little bit about you in the right context. And the trap of that is that the question is so vague that you could steer it in many different directions. So some people will enjoy the more personal effects about you, like, hey, you have a son, I have a son, you live near the border, I live near the border, whatever that may be. Or some folks, and traditionally this is what happens in a professional interview, but you get closer to, well, here is the chronological order of my career and all the professional aspirations that I have in some type of ideally shortened sense, but oftentimes will ramble into 10-15 minute territory and just keep going and going and going, and the wheels fall off. So I like to push back on that question, want to get more specific, and oftentimes provide a preamble of almost like the agenda of what you'd like to cover about yourself and what actually interests the other person in that context. So you might say, hey, one, I could start back at college, but I'm sure you've heard that several of times. So I'm going to truncate some of my experience on what I think is most appropriate for you and the mission of your company. And I'll share a little bit about myself, my family, and some of the things that are important to me, and then move on to ask some questions. And sometimes I'll even ask permission, like, hey, is that kind of the outline of what you'd like to see covered today? So providing a little bit of boundaries to something that's so broad and vague to keep yourself focused in the right direction, and to reiterate that through a verbal affirmation to make sure you're on the right track every step of the way.
And one of the things that I have noticed, particularly with folks in transition, is that they feel the need to explain why they're not at their last job. And often from a almost defensive mode. And I'm wondering, and I especially appreciate the notion that this is not a chronology. They're listening for, and correct me if I'm wrong, they are listening for signals that say this person aligns with what I think we need for the company to move us forward, right? So how do you make sure when you ask such a vague question, and I know you've qualified it down, but I remember you told, so how do you get to reframe the answer in a way that you can talk about a specific experience and have them see through that experience? Oh, okay. Those are things I'm looking for.
Yeah. So you know how everyone's surface level interview advice is to do your research? You go to the website and you look it up and you're looking for people and you're looking at people you might report to, or maybe the stock performance or any details about the company. And then what often happens is in the interview process, you say, well, I did my research and I saw all these things. Well, so I guess one way of saying, yes, you do your research ahead of time, identifying, you're looking for a shared identity that you have with them, whether that come from your experience and what they're looking for, some of the challenges that they're facing, you're applying your experience to their needs in some capacity. And so we should do enough research to be able to make some, we could say, assumptions on what that company may be going through to show your expertise. I know several of the folks on this call actually know offline out of CMO huddles. As an example, some of them are startup experts, and they've gone through a certain iteration where, generally speaking, the same go-to-market strategy is roughly applicable. So you can make some assumptions on what a company may be going through. I think the key piece here is that it's more important to find alignment with the company than it is to be impressive with your background. So if you don't know where that alignment is, don't just say, hey, these are all these impressive results I had from my career. It may not matter, or so much time has passed that a company may be going through a completely different set of challenges and you'll miss the mark. So if you don't know exactly how to find alignment through that, that means you need to ask more questions. You either didn't discover enough through what was publicly available through your preparation, but now's your second chance to do that based off, hey, Drew, is this conversation going the way that you had hoped? Am I covering your agenda items? Or perhaps you could share an agenda on what's most important to you. My hunch is that at this stage, go-to-market's pretty important. Your early stage, you're trying to grow, or you're pre-IPO and you need to maximize the processes, whatever that may be. We may make some assumptions based off the research that we did prior.
One of the things I just heard, and alignment is more important than being impressive. And I think that's such a well said and an important part of this. So give me an example, because again, you did so of a story, of a way of telling your career in a context that sort of could create alignment. So, I mean, I think when you and I talked, you had the story of, I was at the, Salesforce, and this is the thing, you talked about this team size. I'm wondering if you could sort of give a real example of that so that folks can hear that.
Yeah. And so this is pretty general, so you have to bear with me while I unpack this. I was using an example that, let's say, the person that you're interviewing with has a software product that is involved with Salesforce, as an example. You know that to be true. Now, in my past experience, I've gone to Dreamforce events, I've drank the blue Kool-Aid, I've been in the Benioff Tower, whatever it is. Now, I could create some alignment just to show that I understand the ecosystem of the environment that they sell into in some context. So you might tell a story about, I went to Dreamforce in 2014 through 2016, did the booth thing, different company each time, whatever it may be, just to show that you're at least acknowledging the same shared identity of that ecosystem, as an example. And what's interesting is, and this is where I think the alignment is more important than being impressive. It doesn't matter if I've been to 15 Dreamforces, I don't even know how many there's been. What I've done in the past doesn't necessarily guarantee success for your future. Right. So I want to see alignment with the direction that you're going here. So as I'm building that shared identity in the past, I've been to the Dreamforces, I understand Salesforce, whatever. That's just showing that you can trust me, that we can speak on a higher level and get a little deeper into the weeds as necessary. Now, what you may say is, I've seen some things that worked. There's a lot of failures and learnings I've had. Can you tell me a little bit more about what some of your challenges are in the next 12 months? So the trick with these, as we find alignment, we don't want to find past alignment, we want to find future alignment. So what you've done in the past, and a lot of marketers specific, especially C-suite marketers and CMOs, in order to get to the position of power that you've been in at your organizations, you've had to be pretty forward thinking and growth mindset oriented. And that is directly in contrast to what a lot of recruiters look for, which is, has so-and-so done this before? And so you're growth oriented and you're like, hey, do you want to do this again? You're trying to find future alignment and growth. So we need to communicate towards a future state and see if we still have alignment with that company in that regards too. Right. That was a lot. So I know you'll stop
I know.
me there.
So let's, and again, let's talk about that. So future state. So you've done your homework. You realize that they're in full growth mode. They're trying to get from 25 million to 50 million. That means you're going to need a team of 5. You've led a team of 5. Maybe we can just sort of, what are the common components of a compelling interview? And maybe that'll help us frame this.
Sometimes it's commiserating with the challenges, whether you have the solution or not. Just to recognize, let's say you said a team of 5, right? There's several folks here that have led at least a team of 5. You might talk about some of the challenges that you had prior in that growth stage. And you might also say that, man, we concentrated on this for about 2 years. We were racking our heads against the wall, trying to solve this problem, trying to grow through marketing, trying to get our channel strategies right, trying to, whatever it may be. Hell, trying to find alignment with sales. It always felt like we were second-class citizens in marketing. Right. And you can even use language to prod and see whether the company respects marketing as high as other functions, as an example, in the way that you structure some of those questions. So you might commiserate with the challenge and just show that you understand the challenge. And then I like to propose a few alternate solutions just to see where the other person's head's at for the future. So you might say, there's a couple of things we tried. We tried hiring a junior team and onboarding them, and honestly, that was a waste of time. We also tried outsourcing to an agency. We built some partnerships. We did this. Ultimately, we failed in some of these capacities, which maybe you've tried some of these things, whatever. So we're trying to see what solutions they've tried, what you might be able to then hone in on what might be more effective for them, because something that worked for you in the past may not work for them. So as an example, if you said, hey, I hired 4 people and this is what the org chart looks like and it works every time, promise. And that person's like, yeah, we tried that. You're dumb. It's not going to work here. Right. You don't have alignment. So you might want to just explore a couple options. We tried this path. We tried this path, found some success. This is what we learned in this context. Can you share a little bit about some of the things that you've been working on, what you've tried? And maybe it was timing that was off. Maybe it's this, whatever. So we're just asking some more open-ended questions to see the direction that they're interested in heading in. And what that does to the process, it tells you exactly the information you need to do to tell the right stories in the right context to move that interview forward.
Right stories, right context. So what's interesting here, and I think there might be some folks that would be reluctant to say, we tried this and it didn't work. I'm assuming that there is something at the end of this story where we tried this and it worked really well. Certainly.
Well, sometimes it depends on the context of what you've done in your career. Because if you've done a bunch of things that haven't worked and you had an 18-month tenure or a short tenure, CMOs often have a short tenure. Sometimes things didn't work. Sometimes it's more appropriate to be ultimately pragmatic and honest about things that didn't work and that you couldn't find alignment and what you learned from that so that you can come in as your most authentic self. Because sometimes you'll see someone will have a short tenure of 8 months. And then on their resume, they'll write all of these monumental successes, which may or may not be true. But from a recruiter's perspective or hiring manager, it's man, how could you possibly accomplish that in 8 months? That was probably the rest of the team. And you were riding the tailwinds into success there. You can claim that. Right. But you only lasted 8 months. So something was wrong there or whatever. So you may share that areas where you didn't find alignment and you're learning from that as authentically as possible to determine whether that the person is going to judge you for that or find that as ultimately relieving that you're honest about it. So I agree that ultimately you would want to come to some type of logical conclusion where you've been successful. That certainly sounds better and is more appealing. However, even if you didn't, it's okay to be really honest as long as you share, hey, these are some of the things that I didn't think went right. And I ultimately wasn't able to secure the budget that I thought was necessary to go to market in this particular climate. Now, can you share with me how you're thinking about marketing? And now, as the CMOs know, sometimes people see marketing as a line item expense and not an investment. So we may want to ask some questions to challenge that thinking along the way too.
And ultimately, you're really leading this conversation. It feels like you're trying to guide it to a place. I mean, you're discovering things, but you're also setting yourself up and as you said, again, getting to the fact that you can help this company get to the future state based on some of the experiences that you've had in the past, good and bad, right? I mean, I got to believe that. And so go ahead. There wasn't really a question in there, but feel free to comment.
No, it's just that you're ultimately going to have to lay your cards on the table in some capacity of what's worked, what's not worked, strategies you decide, and understand what they've been doing, what's worked, what hasn't worked. Unless you're speaking with just the earliest stage of startups and you're the very first marketing hire, right? You're going to have the opportunity to fail a lot and then get fired probably pretty quickly after that, depending on how the startup's doing. So if you're going into a more mid-size or larger organization, you're going to want to know, what have you been doing? What's working? What's not working? I've tried these things. This is where the disconnect is. This is what the learnings are. Did you have that similar conclusion? Why or why not? So it's an exploration. In a sales call, this would be a discovery call. We're just discovering if there's alignment here. If we don't understand their challenges thoroughly, how can you be so confident that you can solve them? Right? So we want to understand, hey, that is a problem. I know how to build out the organization. I know how to do the hiring. I know how to mentor the team up in this context. I know how to work within these confines. That can ultimately develop your confidence and at least understand. I think one of the tricky things is in the interview process, everyone's wearing their Sunday best. Like everything's great. I ultimately want to know what dirty laundry I'm stepping into when I'm going into an organization. I think everyone else would like to know that too. Where are the skeletons in the closet? What are you not telling me? And one of the ways we can get someone to be more honest and forthcoming about the challenges is by accepting some of our challenges and inviting them to share by being transparent and saying, I've made these mistakes. I've had these failures. That'll help others feel more comfortable sharing the things that they ultimately like to hide.
Yeah, it's so funny. So I was reading the notes from 2 huddles we had in April on sort of managing up and sideways. And one of the commonalities that sort of shocked me is how many suboptimal, non-stellar CEOs are out there and that folks work for. And one of them said in the interview process, it's all with the CEO, it's all sunshine and rainbows. And then you get in there and find out this is like negative Nelly, and you've got a real problem. So I love the way you're sort of, I'll tell you, I'll show you a little bit about what I got going. Maybe you'll, so honesty begets honesty. I want to sort of, there seems to be a fine line here though, in that you can't diss your previous employer, right?
I think you can get away with it carefully, depending on the context. I don't think it's good form to specifically blast someone else unless you're sharing your mistakes as well with it. And ultimately, you might say like, hey, we had a disagreement in strategy, right? And I know there's some folks I've talked to on this call where their strategy was actually right. They got fired anyways. You hear 2 or 3 years later, somebody make a phone call. You were right. We should have done that. Well, it's too late. You fired me 3 years ago, right? Right. And so that can be frustrating, but you might share, I had a difference of opinion. We tore apart, and you might share the outline without necessarily placing blame to see whether that new future CEO or whomever it is you're speaking with agrees with your decision in that context as well. So if you're going to take something that is, you might test the waters ahead of time. So as an example, I worked for a CEO who we took some VC money. It was about $2 million. We didn't have product market fit. We had 2 million, and this individual wanted me to spend all of that money on paid advertising just to get somebody into the product, where our average time in product was 6 to 8 seconds. And they said, look, I want you to spend $40,000, $50,000 a month to get that from 6 to 8 seconds to 14 seconds so we can get some learnings for the product. And I basically said, no, that is an absolute waste of money. Like, I do not want to just burn someone else's money because it's someone else's money. Now, I might ask prior to that conversation, what are your thoughts on extensively spending in SEM or search engine marketing, right? And see if someone says, oh, I think it's a total waste of money. Then you have the green light to maybe say, this was our difference of opinion. It actually came about this thing I already know you agree with me on. And so you can, I don't want to say bashing is not the right word. It's really more explaining the scenario of the difference of opinion. And it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So if you just say, yeah, we didn't get along and I moved on and they fired me or whatever, which I don't think anyone would openly say, right? It's not going to go over as well as if you've structured it in a way to share your difference of opinion and kind of prove that you're kind of in the clear before you move that. So it's very calculated. to get to that, but I don't think it's necessarily a don't go there type thing.
So what do you think are some of the most common mistakes that CMOs make in interviews?
It's a lot of focus on, from my understanding, what I've seen from a lot of folks, they focus a lot on themselves, their background, their skills, and what they've accomplished, and less on winning over the other person. So a lot of times we prepare, and comes to story, and I think I'm a little guilty of perpetuating this myself. It's my very first blog article. It's like, here's how you answer the tell me about yourself. Here's how you answer this. And it's very self-serving. It's very, this is how my career's worked. This is how it's gone. This is that. And like you practice, it's polished, and you're like, here's the context, here's the actions I took, here's the result, here's the resume. It's very self-serving, right? And ultimately, it doesn't matter how good you've been in the past. Only thing that matters is, can you perform in the future? So you have to build that future alignment. The only way to do that is to concentrate on the other person's needs more so than your own, and more so than what you've perfectly polished or accepted. And you could polish 20, 30, 40 stories, and only a handful are going to be relevant to the context. And the only way you're going to know which ones are relevant are by asking the questions. So as an example, Drew, I need to win you over. I don't need to tell you everything about myself and impress you. I need to understand what you're looking for and understand whether or not I can help you or not. So there's a big mistake in that. We often focus too much on how do I tell my past in such a perfect way that people understand me with clarity. And I would rather understand how to direct the conversation to understand the future needs and if there's alignment. So it's just a slight mental shift. I'm like, how do we push this conversation forward and not focus on me or the past?
What I was thinking about as you were talking, it's funny because in Huddles last month, when we were talking about challenges related to pipeline, one of the sort of moments of epiphanies in it is, there's a lot of things, they call it sales enablement, or they call it buyer enablement. And where we ended up was we called this value enablement. Like, how do you just make sure that the value, you're doing something of value at every step of the way, so that the folks, and so it feels like this is value enablement, right? You're trying to help the CEO see their way, or whoever it is, to a future state that you can contribute to. And you're not going to do that by saying, at my last job, I did these 5 things. Aren't I great?
Yeah, you kind of brought me on a tangent here, and that is us marketers loving our buzzwords, like sales enablement, buyer enablement,
right,
value enablement, whatever it may be. And a lot of times I'll see not just CMOs, but folks in general will get hung up on the terminology of what something's called. Well, B2B SaaS expert with enterprise, yada, 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 whatever it may be, right? Or you'll see folks that have 15 years of experience for something that's only been around for 3 or 4 years, right? Which is very interesting. Suddenly everyone's an AI expert, right? And so the terminology is always changing. We need to build the breadcrumbs on why it's relevant. And so you might say the activities that I was doing in the past, let's say you were just let's say you're a head of marketing, right? And you're applying for a VP of product marketing position. Now, head of marketing, product marketing, 2 different concepts, all general marketing. Product marketing is very specific, go-to-market focused, whatever. You might draw the breadcrumbs out. While my title was head of marketing, a lot of my duties were focusing on go-to-market, this, and outline what may be today called a product marketing role, or whatever that may look like. Or as a CMO, let's say you're only a CMO of a small team, and now you're interviewing for a CMO of a larger team. You're going to have to draw the breadcrumbs on how you can make that connection at the larger level. So while it appeared we had a small team here, I also supported the sales team in this effort and the product team in this effort. And ultimately the org looked like this. And you're drawing the breadcrumb conclusions on why those things are actually similar, even if titles or buzzwords are off.
So we've talked about the mistakes of just talking too much about yourself and your past experience. You had used this expression, walking the fine line between assertive and arrogant, and want to make sure that assertive is the right term, and how you can walk this. I mean, there's a certain confidence that you need to, bring to the interview, right? And that's through the stories and through your accomplishments and through your questions. But the arrogance part, I guess, is the other side of it. Oh yeah, I could do this in my sleep. Talk a little bit about that fine line.
Yeah, I think the arrogance is the my shit doesn't stink type approach, which I'm often very sensitive to this because I come across as very arrogant all the time. So this may not be the best advice coming from me. I've struggled with ego and arrogance a lot in my life. I think the assertiveness comes from being fearless to ask the questions that are necessary. So when you ask me a question like, tell me about yourself, I actually wrote an article. I think that's a relatively stupid question because it's not direct enough. Like, I want you to be more specific, right? It's okay. It's like, that's like scheduling a meeting without an agenda, right? Like, hey, we're going to meet. Right, cool. What are we meeting about? And so it's when you're asked general questions or you don't have enough context or you don't know how to confidently answer, instead of feeling scared, assertively ask the types of questions that are necessary and assert yourself into that and show your leadership and take ownership of that interview. So sometimes you're working with an HR or maybe a recruiter or headhunter that doesn't know the marketing function or the entire org as well as you do. I would hope not. You're a CMO, they're a recruiter, as an example. You should feel confident saying, more specifically, I think this is the area we should concentrate. Can you correct me if I'm wrong? Like, that is an assertive question to ask. That's not an arrogant question to ask, right? You're saying, it sounds like, this is a label, it sounds like you need someone very adept at go-to-market who can build a team from 5 to 10 to do this to this, right? Is there anything that I'm missing? Rather than just answering like if somebody said, hey, what's your experience with this growth stage? Oh, I've done this, I've done that. I did that back at Cisco. I did this, I did that. And I was like, cool. Rather than saying all this crap that you did in the past, just say, it sounds like this is what you need, right? Is there anything that I'm missing? I'll share a couple stories where I've tackled this back at Cisco. We had some challenges with this back at IBM, whatever it may be, right? Now, there's a couple things. Where would you like us to concentrate our focus? Because if we covered all these topics, it'd be a couple hours, right? And one of the things that we could do here is we can control time and keep interest going, because ultimately the point of the interview is to get another phone call, right? We need to keep the process moving forward. So if we allude to the fact that we know all of these extra things, which we can only do by asserting ourselves in the conversation and showing at least the table of contents of knowledge that you can uncover by continuing to talk to me. And we could say, look, we can go into go-to-market, man, we could be doing that for 4 or 5 hours across the org. What might be best is let's get a roundtable discussion together. Let's loop in John, the CEO, and Kathy, the chief operating officer, and we'll all get together. I'll do a presentation. Like you're asserting, I'll do a 30, 60, 90, whatever you're saying, these things will happen. And I'm available on Friday to do that. Like, you're controlling the next steps and asserting yourself of what the next steps of the process can be, rather than, yeah, I've done that. Do you care? Does it align here? So it's a slight nuance of, I think arrogance is talking a lot about yourself. Assertiveness is concentrating on them and walking through the steps and the breadcrumbs for them. I also call this eliminating the friction of what the next steps may be. So as a recruiter, you might not like, I think you're going to talk to the CEO. I don't know. You might talk to this person next. And you might say, what I found in the past is that when I get the chief financial officer and the CEO and one of the board members in the same room, man, the sparks fly. So we should organize that meeting. I'm available on Friday or Tuesday. That eliminates the back and forth, like, availability question. Like, you can eliminate some friction, and you're also assuring yourself this is when the next conversation is going to happen. And that's being assertive. And they might say, hey, we're not ready to talk to you again. At least you know where you stand because you've asserted what the next steps could be. They said, hey, we're not ready for that. Now, you know, I didn't do so good in that interview, instead of just twiddling your thumbs and getting ghosted.
Yeah, as you're talking, I'm thinking, oh my God, I would need to practice this and practice this and practice, because it's a new, like, it's new skill set in some way. But I couldn't help but hear you mention 30, 60, 90. And one of the contentious issues among the folks on our transition team is that employers, potential employers, ask for free marketing advice. And some do it in a very nefarious way, like they have no intention of
Sure.
hire and they just go for it. But on other occasions, the requested thinking can help the candidate think through if they want the job, to get to know the company better. So what's your advice in this? How do you avoid giving, quote, free marketing advice, but also at the same time help you, get the job?
Yeah, so I'm going to be more controversial in this, and it's that if somebody's going to ask you, like, I mean, obviously contextually is important. If it's a very small company and those things, and they're obviously abusing you, it's obvious abuse. You know, a lot of CMOs make more than $500,000 a year or even greater, right? I know several that make several million a year, right? Somebody asks you to put together a portfolio and it takes you 10 hours. I honestly don't care. You make enough money to buck up and do the work, right? Or you say, man, I'm really not sold on this company. Well, you probably don't have alignment. You don't need to go through and go ahead and back out and do your thing, right? Don't take it out on them. I kind of give the employer the benefit of the doubt there. You know how much your time is worth and whether or not you want to put the effort in to make that $500,000 a year. Hey, that's on you, right? I know folks that, are getting started in their career that would do anything possible just to have a shot in the room that you're turning down at that. So it's kind of a reminder that it is a competitive market out there. And if you want to earn top dollars, you have to perform with that, which is probably not the answer a lot of people like to hear. And the other thing is that a 30, 60, 90 to me is starting to become a red flag. And not in that, I don't think it's important that you plan out your first 30, 60, or 90. It's the time frame that I'm worried about. Like, why are we worried about only 3 months of my CMO career here? Is that because that's a third of my tenure at your company and it's really important that I get off the ground right? Because what happened to the good old days where people would work at a company for 5 or 8 or 10 or 20 years? So when I hear a time frame, and when you talk to really, really wealthy folks and they're planning out their investments and things, you can tell how successful someone is by the magnitudes of time that they talk about. So this is, and I know there's some investment marketers in here too, so they probably recognize as well. But if someone's saying, yeah, in the next couple of months, I'm going to be doing this and that, the short time frame, very short. When somebody's planning out investments that are 8, 10 years down the line, hey, I'm going to buy this, we're going to renovate it for 4 or 5 years, like it's going to make some money in 10 years. Like, they're playing big time league. When a company is like, yeah, what are we going to do in the first 30 days? Like, I don't know. I'm going to talk to people on the team and get up to speed.
Exactly.
I don't know anything yet. I don't know the resources. I don't know the context. I don't know maybe you do know the industry really well, but everything is a little bit more unique. So if they're expecting like big milestone results in 30, 60, or 90, they're seeing marketing as a transactional cost, like $1 in a bucket and $1.20 back, ideally. And a lot of marketing is an investment that takes time. Advertising might give you $1 in and $1.50 back for some amount of time. But marketing is going to take substantial investment. You're building brand, you're developing customer awareness, whatever it may be, learning the sales team, changing the messaging. It's a lot of work. And when someone says, what's going to happen in 30 days? To me, it can be a red flag that they don't necessarily understand marketing in the context that you do, which is fair. You're the marketing leader, but it may offer an invitation for you to correct. It's like, hey, yeah, I'm interested in what the first 90 days looks like, but I'm also interested in what 12 months looks like and 24. So let's extend this out because I plan on being here for a while.
And so the issue is not the free marketing advice. The issue is 30, 60, 90. And I think that's a really important point, because if you want to be there a while and you want to get to know, and I tell this story in transition teams huddle of a huddler who actually used the request for a plan to say, I'm happy to put together a plan, but I need to talk to these 4 executives. Can we get that on the calendar? And that process enabled this individual to hit the ground running. The plan was actually the plan that they ended up using. And it was a great way for them to sort of qualify the company and sort of take control, as you say. So, but I think that's the key there is they were very interested in the job. That only confirmed the interest. They got a chance. There was some give and take in this process.
Yeah, and the thing is, they took it seriously, Drew. They said, in order for me to do a good job, I'm going to need to talk to these people, right? Not, oh, this is going to be a lot of work. Let me back out because they're getting free advice, right? So they wanted it and they went for it. Now, one thing that you could, so let's say somebody gives you a 30, 60, 90, we want it on Thursday and today's Wednesday, right? But that happens all the time. They want to speed up the process, right? That'll happen, especially at startups. You may push back and say, well, do you want it to be generic or do you want it to be really good? Like you just ask them straight, do you want something that's going to be total bullshit or do you want something that's going to be very tactical and something that we can really move on? And of course, someone's like, well, I don't want the bullshit answer. Like, give me something real. It's like, great. That's going to take me about 10 days. I'm going to need to interview these folks. And that way we can make it really valuable in every step of the way. While I'm talking to your operating officer, I'm talking to your sales leader, whatever it is, I'll be presenting ideas and providing value along the way and organizing that into a deck to present with you. Like that is being assertive, right?
I'm so glad
also,
we're recording this, by the way, because just that last sentence is one that I would, if I were interviewing for a job, I would want to memorize. It wouldn't flow right out of my tongue. It's been a long time since I had to interview for a job. So obviously I'm out of practice, but I just, that is a great way of framing it. So, one of the things about interview processes is that you could end up talking to a lot of people. You could talk to a recruiter, you could talk to CEOs, and there's often misalignment between those two. Do you have any thoughts on the differences, or how can you make sure that they're aligned so you're not wasting time?
So I guess some of the psychological things that we do here is, first of all, you're working the individual that you're talking to, not just yourself and your past story or the company necessarily. You want to work with empathy, the person on the other end of the line. So if you're talking with a recruiter, or let's say a sourcer, very early stage, I might be assertive in that. I mean, like, hey, I imagine you're talking to several CMOs, right? Can you share with me the checklist of what you're looking to move forward to the CEO? Now, what's better is knowing the CEO's name, knowing everyone else's names, and inserting those names consistently to show that you understand their ecosystem, as an example. So, hey, what are some of the boxes that you need to check here? I'm happy to share. Let's have a great time in this conversation. You're working that person. You're not expecting them to be a marketing expert. You want to know what's going to make you look good to hand me off to the other person, right? Now, what you may say, and again, it's not what you say, it's how you say it as you go through. I call this running the gauntlet of different people at the organization. You might say, I'll use Kathy and John as an example again. Kathy is the CFO or COO, and John is the CEO in this context. You might say, hey, John, I was having a conversation with Kathy, and we were exploring this particular go-to-market, and it sounds a little different than what you expected here, right? Now, I want to make sure we're in alignment, because there's goodness and there's good in that, whatever. Like, you don't have to be totally kissing ass here, but you want to explain that Kathy and I were exploring this path, and it sounds like that might not be an area you're interested in. How can we best move forward in a different way, right? So it's not, I heard something different from Kathy and not mentioning it. We have to communicate those things, but we're not going to throw Kathy under the bus. And I think the other thing to recognize is when you're on the outside, they know, like, it doesn't matter if you're talking to somebody. And I heard this context the other day. A lot of C-suite folks get frustrated when they have to interview with folks that are going to be their subordinates, because how are they going to know a good leader when they see one? They focus on, well, I've done all these things. You should respect me for that. Again, it's about that person. What is that person looking for? So asking them about, what do you see in this? What are the best marketing opportunities that you see for the company? Like, you're the expert on this company. I'm coming in as an outsider. What do you see? Like, you've been here for 2 years. You've been in the weeds. Like, share your secrets with me. And then we say things like, as we partner together, we'll go talk to Kathy and John, and we'll get this strategy moved forward, and we'll do that together. Now we're being empathetic to everyone's needs, and the key here too is using the names of other people will help you be more, I guess, you're part of the tribe, right?
Yeah,
because
sort of, you're already inserting
says,
yourself into the team.
Right, you're not saying the CEO. When we work with the CEO and the board, you're saying, so John and I were having a conversation the other day, and we were talking with Kathy, right? And so this is, we're familiar, right? We're using name association, and we're talking with others. It sounds like there's a difference of opinion here. Now let's iron this out, right? It's still solution oriented. It's not necessarily blowing smoke. You're not hiding from the misalignment. You're calling it out, but you're not calling it out like somebody's stupid for not knowing, right? So there's a couple different kind of tips to navigate. You also mentioned that you're out of practice when it came to interviewing. And I think that the pressure that folks put on themselves in an interview environment is one of the big challenges that we have, is that you got to get all straight. You're ready. I'm in interview mode. I got to put on this something like it's a facade ultimately, right? It's a little bit more perked up and a little bit more attentive than you typically are, which just makes you nervous. You have to perform a certain way. You have to think about all these things. And when you truly have executive presence, you're definitely more relaxed and you're open and you take up space. And look, we could just naturally shoot the shit and have a conversation because you're comfortable. And this is an environment that you don't have to practice for so much. It's just a conversation. When you change yourself and you stress yourself out and you try to be someone that you're not, one, you get misalignment because you're showing a character that you're not actually every day. That pressure often puts you in a subservient role to whoever you're talking to because you have a need to impress and a need to fit in and a need to move forward. Now, I don't know about all the other C-suite executives here, but subservient and executive is not a good mixture, right? So we're looking for casual, like we're peers. Even when you're talking to subordinates, we're peers. When you're talking to the sourcer or recruiter, we're just peers. We're solving problems together. It's not anything you have to stress yourself out over and perform in some archaic interview way where you're starching all your clothes and straightening the tie. It doesn't have to be so strict.
I get the being comfortable and being yourself and trying to bond with the individual. I do think that there are certain expressions that or ways of framing a conversation that may not be initially natural that could become natural with practice. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying be somebody that you're not, but I could believe that in order to frame it and think about it, if you're used to, for example, telling your story in a chronological way, and suddenly you need to change it and do it in a different way, that might take some practice. A little bit of rehearsing probably wouldn't be a bad idea.
So
now,
one last piece there is it's okay to narrate that you're not an expert, right? So you might say, man, I haven't interviewed in, a decade. Let's say you're coming from a long tenure. I haven't interviewed in like a decade. You'll have to forgive me. I might be a bit rusty, right? That could do a couple. One, it lets the monkey off your back, right? You've at least addressed this possible insecurity that you have about not being as polished. So you're letting people know. It could also show you're really loyal to your company and were there for 10 years and you didn't need to do any damn interviews, or you were always recruited out of roles and people pulled you, or somebody, because that happens in our careers, people pull us to the next job. So you haven't had to be practiced with this. So thanks for bearing with me. I might be a little rusty and I'm still working through, I think, what some of my key learnings here are. And these are the areas I think are most applicable. Maybe you can support me if I'm wrong. So it's the structure, how you organize, narrating your thoughts and asking the questions and building out the breadcrumbs. More important than being perfect and dialed in. And well, I did this in college, and then I got my MBA. Then I went back for a PhD in communications because that makes me a great marketer, great in the AI world, like whatever it may be. You don't have to spin all of that stuff in that particular way.
A large number of huddlers are women. Do they face different challenges in interviews?
Absolutely. I mean, we are different in a lot of ways. What's interesting is I've gotten a lot of pushbacks, particularly on the aggression versus assertive piece, because I didn't used to call it being assertive, and I actually didn't call it aggressive until a female executive called me out and said, "These are great strategies for men. It won't work for women. We'll look like bitches," right? And women have to balance that line all the time. And I push back and I look, I'm not trying to be aggressive or bitchy. There's a difference between that and being assertive. And what's interesting is most of my career has been as English as a second language, minorities and women, primarily. I don't actually work with a lot of men and what I found is a lot of men are very confident and don't feel like they need support in a lot of ways. And sometimes they just kind of naturally fall into that, right? And what I've learned on the assertiveness side, I've learned most of my assertive traits from women specifically. And that's because I found that they often will study ways to master communication in order to feel comfortable in the boardroom in ways that they've been, and I'm unqualified to say this, but maybe oppressed in the past, right? I don't know if that's the right terminology, right? But ways that women have had to work a little bit harder than someone like myself. And what I've seen is some women that have been masterful in their communication and how they say things and how they pull people along. And yes, we've dealt with both the men and the women that are overly aggressive and total assholes. You're like, man, I would never want to work for that person. So that's not gender specific, right? But I have learned a lot from how it's almost had to be a little bit more delicate. It's not like locker room talk and in all of the boardrooms, especially in Silicon Valley and especially in more of the tech focused centers are going to be a little bit different boardrooms than say a boardroom in Texas, right? There's always a different environment that you have to play with and different challenges across the board. So it's very difficult to have like a generalization of what works and doesn't work there.
Perfect. So a lot of folks in the transition team lament that they got down to the finals. There were just 2 CMOs. They didn't know who their competitor was, but then they find out they didn't get the opportunity. And then they ask why, and then they get some sort of legally safe answer that doesn't really give them any information that they could use next time. Is there any way to get information that would help you increase your odds of getting the job that you want next time?
Yeah, so this is going to potentially piss people off, but if you don't know where you stand prior to the decision being made, that's your fault. You need to address these things sooner, and you need to address your competition sooner and differentiate yourself from the competition better ahead of time. After the fact, basically useless. Like there's legally, you're trapped. You know, some of you are working in companies where you're absolutely legally trapped, or in industries where you just can't touch it. Because so you might get away with it at some startups where somebody like kind of has a heart to heart with you if you really ask for it, right? But you should know where you stand ahead of time. And so one of the concepts that I help some clients with is how to build a wedge between you and your competition and how to differentiate yourself from the competition. So as an example, let's say you used a concept like, hey, I hired somebody local instead of somebody across the pond or something. Let's just say you're in Europe, right? You should have addressed that concept way sooner, right? You should address how people are different. So let me give you an example. Look, you're hiring a CMO for the first time CMO. I want to understand, why do you want someone so senior, right? So what are your thoughts on hiring a senior CMO? Now, have you considered hiring maybe someone with 5-10 years less experience, maybe 2 of those folks, and building out a team there? Hear their answer. Well, we don't want that. We want somebody senior. Cool. I'm senior. Tick that box. Have you thought about hiring someone local, right? Someone in office every day so they can share the executive presence. What are some of the pros and cons of that for you? Right? They might tell an answer. Now, have you thought about going to an agency? Why not just offload all of this to an agency, have that agency report into you, and save some money on a senior hire like me? So this is how you can wedge out your comp expectations too, right? Like you're building the allure that you're expensive, right? So let me challenge you. Why would you work with somebody with my level of expertise versus, 3 or 4 junior folks, or a vendor, or this, or someone remote, or this, or whatever all of the different options may be? And you are quite literally negotiating against yourself while they're affirming, I want you. I want someone like you because of this. I want someone like you. So now they have to be consistent with their desires, and what they're desiring is, by definition, and the way that you've outlined the question, what you've described as yourself. So I'm saying, why hire someone as seasoned and this is arrogant, by the way, this is sarcastically arrogant. Why would you hire somebody expensive and senior and strategic in whatever it is your traits are? Have you considered a vendor? Have you considered someone more junior? And they're talking themselves out of your competition along the way. Then if you don't get the job, you at least know, hey, we chose to go with somebody that was local because that was a sticking point for us. And you knew that ahead of time, right? Which could become a negotiation key a little bit later. So I call that driving a wedge. Give them every option. Talk about all of your competition. Talk your competition up. and have them affirm that you're the answer. And as they're affirming their list, you're like, there's a story I could tell. There's something I can drive a little deeper. There's something I can confirm, be consistent with. So you know exactly what their intentions are, and you are the only candidate at that point. Once you've eliminated all their other options, who has negotiation power at that point? They have no other options. They've verbally committed to you every step of the way. You know exactly what you need to do to win that deal. So
There it is.
my challenge
All right.
is you need to anticipate that ahead of time.
So we probably could just keep going and keep going on interviewing, but we did promise that there would be some conversations about negotiation. And it feels like, you know, you and I talked about that the negotiation begins before the interview. And then we just had a question about how do you handle the question, what are your compensation requirements? So let's just try to thread those things in terms of negotiations together. It's like it's a three-fer. Go for it.
Yeah, this is the fun part, because if there's one takeaway that anyone's going to get from this will make you several hundred thousand, if not millions more in your career by getting these pieces right. So one is, while you're, you're negotiating before you have the first conversation in a couple ways. And that is, people will consider, there's a perception about chief marketing officers. There's a perception about chief marketing officers at startups, at mid-size, at larger companies. There's a perception about chief marketing officers based off of the compensation benchmarks, what recruiters think, what people say about you, your network. All of these things play to your perception, right? So if you're a CMO at a Series A, the perception might be this person makes maybe 200 grand. They're very hands-on and tactical. That will influence your negotiation. It will influence the direction of where you're going. It'll influence the first offer. So what this means is we need to be exceptionally mindful about the positions that we choose, how we publicize them. The other piece is that nobody knows your career like you do. So you don't necessarily have to broadcast every single damn thing that you do on LinkedIn, which is contrarian to what a lot of LinkedIn experts will tell you. Share to the world, right? Well, a lot of things are difficult to walk back. Hey, I just got this new job, didn't work out. 3 months later, who looks like the asshole? Is it the company or is it you for only making it 3 months, right? So anyway, be mindful of what you say, right? Because what you say on LinkedIn, what you have brand-wise, the company wears perception for you. It influences how much money you make, how attractive you are to recruiters. How many folks have been like, oh, we're just going to hire folks from Meta. If you worked at Meta, you've been validated by the world. Therefore, you are good. Not true, by the way, but that perception helps influence their career forward. Now, the piece that will make you the money is, one, understanding how all these things impact, but it's that compensation question. You often get it from the recruiter screen, and sometimes it's the first damn question they ask, which is frustrating. Sometimes they butter you up for about 28 minutes, and as they're scheduling the follow-up, they just they leak it in real quick to get you to answer when there's only like a minute left, right? Just to pressure you into that little time block, which can be pretty frustrating. And so on the compensation question, we're not necessarily deflecting, right? We don't want to be deceptive. We don't want to say we don't want to answer that. But ultimately, if you're hearing about it at the recruiter screen, it's too damn early to know for sure. How many people have interviewed, started with one job description and ended with another when they were done? But the first thing you said was, I want to make $400,000 a year. Now the job suddenly has 3 or 4 new teams reporting into it. Like, you're doing all these other things. Hey, the title even dropped because they changed the job, whatever. They changed a bunch of things, but you're committed to that one thing that you said right at the beginning. So I like to be a little looser in that context. And so you may push back and say, look, it's a bit too early to know for sure. I won't discuss compensation until there's a written offer on the table. Right? That's a borderline aggressive way of saying it, pushing back. Right? You may say, hey, I recognize why you may be asking that right now. Want to make sure we're in alignment compensation wise. Now, for me, it's too early to know for certain what that compensation expectation should be here. Right? Can you share a little bit about the range that you're working with? So this is turning it back on them to get their numbers to know if it's worth your time, so that I can share whether or not we should move forward. And you may get some pushback there. Now, ultimately, this thing can get pretty awkward. Well, if you're a C-suite executive, you should be pretty used to awkward and challenging conversations. And if you're getting your ass kicked by a 28-year-old sourcer for a job, like, we need to reevaluate our career choices. right? We can push back on them, right? The other thing is when you're in a position of transition, they say that having a job is better than not having a job, right? And I don't know if that's a attractiveness, like somebody's willing to hire you, therefore you must be good type of deal. I find that it's pretty emotional in that when you have a job, you can say no to things because you're already getting paid and you are already paying your bills, and you don't really need to make a move unless the job is absolutely terrible. When you're in transition, you're more eager, like, hey, I got to get some money coming in to pay these bills, to pay for my kids, to do whatever it is you need to do. And as you are more eager to get something, you lose negotiation power because you can no longer say no in the same conviction that you could before. And so that will cost you money. So, and I focus on money here because money typically piques folks' interest a bit more than the other things that we can negotiate for. Right? I know we're kind of rapid fire on negotiation advice here, so bear with me. But being able to push back and not overshare early is very important until you know more information. This is also important that if you're going from a startup to a mid-size, the pay structure is totally different. It also means like when you see there's a lot of salary transparency laws coming out, great, you can see the range. Sometimes the range is obnoxious, sometimes it's not. Sometimes the range is a bit beneath what you'd like, and you don't think you can break that range. Well, in many cases, that's bullshit. You can, like, rules are meant to be broken. There are alternative ways of getting paid. What you can't negotiate today, you may be able to negotiate for later as well. So it's tricky because you will sound like an asshole if you challenge all authority, which I have done time and time again. Usually in a losing context. But when you see a set of rules, like here's the job description, here's exactly the range that we're expecting to pay, like, great, let's move forward and let's explore. You can still win more than what they tell you if you keep the possibility open as well. So there was like 4 or 5 different threads that you covered.
No, it's great. And you know what, we're at the end of our time, and clearly we're going to have you back, and we're going to have to do this again and spend more time on negotiation. I still had a ton more questions for you on interviewing, but I need you to provide 2 do's and a don't when it comes to interviewing for a CMO role.
Do focus on the future, not your past. Like that's the biggest takeaway. Always focus on their future, not your past, and how you can get that alignment. The other one is, I guess the quote you had earlier was, do focus on alignment and not being impressive. Since you handed that one to me, don't share your compensation number until there's a written offer on the table.
Awesome. Well, there you have 2 really important do's and 1 very significant don't. And I just wanted to, as I was thinking about you saying, you don't want to be the one to break price. It's an old rule of sales and negotiation. Don't be the person to sort of set the bar. And after all, they're hiring you. They have numbers in mind, so you can take advantage of it. All right. Well, thank you, Jacob Warwick. Amazing conversation. Where can huddlers find you?
LinkedIn's just fine. So
all right.
There aren't a lot of Jacob Warwicks, and then half the huddlers are already connected with me. So you'll have to ask them.
Perfect. All right. Well, there may be some podcast folks, so we'll look up Jacob Warwick on LinkedIn.